Hey, it's LaShawn. Welcome to Semi-Retired Kind of Life. In our last video, I talked a little bit about the impending retirement gap that we as Generation X are careening towards based on how much money we currently have in our portfolios versus how much money we may need, according to some studies. And I want to say it was actually a survey that Northwestern Mutual conducted with Gen X participants. And essentially, as Americans, assume and estimate that we will need somewhere between $1 million and $1.46 million for retirement. That's a huge number. I don't know about you, but I decided to leave my corporate job anyway, and I don't have anywhere close to $1.46 million. I don't have anywhere close to $1 million, but I left anyway because totally different topic, but we could talk about that another time. Burnout is real, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life working in corporate America to try to get to that $1.46 million. So that led me to talk about my potential retirement plan and where I'm heading so that I can avoid having to essentially either work until I die or basically have to cut every expense that I possibly have in order to try to survive and not outlive my retirement savings. So with that, I want to talk about geographic arbitrage. And let's talk about where in the world you can live and retire on $30,000 a year. So with this, I'm going to talk about this is my real budget here in Atlanta and why I've decided to make that move and live elsewhere around the world. And then we can also talk about some real numbers from real cities and projected costs as to what that could look like as I try to retire early and not have to wait until retirement age, which for me is 67 and a half. Not appealing at all. But with that, let's get into it. So here are my real numbers. So today in Atlanta, my monthly total expense is about $80,000 for my lifestyle. And this is real. So between my mortgage and my homeowners association, that's $3,000 a month. Utilities, because of, when summer hits, AC has to be cranking, so my average utilities are about $500 a month. Atlanta is definitely a city where it is most practical to own a car. There is public transport here, but it is very difficult to get where you need to go if, say, you need to go from, say, McDonough to Lawrenceville. If you don't have a car, you're going to be spending quite a lot of time in public transit and connecting across multiple public transit systems within the greater Atlanta metropolitan area. So that being said, groceries, another $350 to $450, not out of the norm. Dining out, yes, I like to eat out. Me and my husband enjoy eating out. We will look for different places and, we have our favorites, so we'll do that. Even our gym membership is $150 a month. And yes, I bowl. You can see that there's a bowling ball up there. I am an avid bowler, as is he. And even just our multiple leagues that we bowl in, just our bowling league fees are roughly $150 a month also. And hair braiding, another thing, sure, I could probably live without it, but I enjoy getting my hair braided. I do it about every 6 weeks. And that on average in Atlanta is about $200. The thing that scared me the most about retirement was the potential cost for healthcare. I took care of my mother for about 10 years from the time she moved in with me, and I had to eventually put her in an assisted living facility as she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 53. It also hits home that, I'm now older than that age as to when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. But all told, over that 10-year period from the time she was first diagnosed and when she moved in with me in 2008 and the time that she passed away in 2018, out of pocket for me to take care of my mom and to pay for her care because she did not make enough money to pay for all of her medical care and expenses, however, made entirely too much money to qualify for Medicare or Medicaid or any type of government assistance. And so I'm the one that covered that shortfall. Over the course of that 10 years where my mom lived here in Atlanta, That estimate for me is somewhere around $250,000 out of my own pocket that I paid, which of course meant that is money I was not contributing to my retirement and for my future for that from that perspective, because obviously, taking care of my mother, it was definitely very important and something that I needed and wanted to do. Now, with that being said, I am now also 55 years old. I realize that if I need to hit my retirement number and to make up for those lost years of retirement savings, I will need to, in order to maintain my current lifestyle in Atlanta, which my annual costs are about $80,000, using the rule of 4, that says my real number is more like $2 million just to stay here in Atlanta, just to maintain my current lifestyle. That also means to go from where I am now with my retirement savings in order to reach that $2 million goal. And if I'm aggressively saving $50,000 a year with a rate of return of 7%, that sets my retirement age at 69. And that's aggressively saving $50,000 a year. I don't know about you guys, that's a lot of money. I don't know that sometimes it's really hard to hit that number. Especially without making significant changes or reductions to my lifestyle. And so we've talked a little bit about healthcare being the number one factor that made me also realize that I need to kind of change my numbers drastically in retirement, because obviously my choices were work longer, and 69 is not an option. I will say this, neither of my parents lived to be 70 years old, so for me to say I'm going to work until I'm 69, when my mom was 67 when she passed away and my father was 69 when he passed away, also that is not something that I want to do. That doesn't sound anywhere remotely close to palatable for me in my retirement. I would like to explore the world. I would like to live my life. I don't want to spend the rest of my life working. And then, of course, since healthcare, seeing that whole situation play out with my mother definitely is something that is one of my fears, which I started this process of researching different countries and potentially moving to different places over a year ago, but I had it all come home to me again just yesterday with a little visit to the dentist. I have a tooth, has me just a little discomfort, it's a little sensitive to hot and cold. Went to the dentist, found out I have a crack in that tooth. The dentist suggests, well, maybe we should try to save it. That's going to be a crown. So, your best case scenario for the cost here is about $1,500. However, if we get in there, or, the tooth should happen to crack fully and we have to do a root canal and do a crown, well, then, your out-of-pocket cost is going to be $3,961. $3,961. So right there, my original estimates for all of this became totally obsolete, and I had to redo this to include my new dental annualized cost, or my new monthly budget item for dental for this year would be an additional $330 if I need to get a crown and a root canal. So again, with all of these numbers floating around, that's 14 more years I would have to work just to get to retirement age before I can retire. And I'm just not looking to do that. So this brings me to one of the cities that I've got to be honest, this was never on my list of potential places. I looked into perhaps moving to Costa Rica, still here in, the Americas, and still relatively close that I could get to my family if I needed to in a hurry or anything like that. Panama was somewhere that I had been considering. Merida, Mexico. These were all places I was considering. However, as I started doing my research, something that kept popping up on the list was Bangkok. And I have to admit, my first thought is The Hangover 2. So, this is probably why this wasn't popping up in my list, but as I've done more and more research, this is a thriving metropolitan city with over 10 million people. The cost of living, where our US dollar stretches way further than it does here, it reduces my costs by more than half than what I'm currently paying, which basically makes my retirement fund look way bigger than it is if I start looking at cities like Bangkok. Now, am I going to have a 2,000 square foot home in Bangkok? No. Do I care? No. It's one of those things where you have to decide what are the things that you have to have in retirement versus what are things that you want to have in retirement. to me, where I live is inconsequential. For more than 26 years of my life, I have always lived away from my family. And so again, I have to think about my quality of retirement versus the cost of my retirement. And a 2,000 square foot home, I don't care about that. That I can get rid of pretty easily. Even things like groceries and dining out are relatively inexpensive. So I'm still estimating quite a bit, living high on the hog here in Bangkok. And if you're wondering where I'm getting any of these estimates, the website I would recommend is Numbeo. That is one, and also Expatistan. They're very good about giving you what quality information and numbers and averages and statistics about the average cost of living. So that is one of the ways that you can do this research before you go, before you just pick up and move and go to another country. So these are ways you can estimate those costs against what you're currently spending in the city that you live in. And then also just this, I know the next question people have is obviously about, well, gee, LaShawn, what kind of medical care would I get in Bangkok, Thailand versus here? And this is where we talk about, medical tourism is a thing. And Thailand is one of those countries where medical tourism is really big. And a lot of the doctors in Thailand are trained here in the US, they're trained in Europe, and then they go back and they work in Thailand. And so a lot of times you can find private hospitals and institutions that basically cater to those of us from America and other countries who are looking for better priced medical options. So now if we look at this compared to my $80,000 a year annual spend in Atlanta, we're looking more at $36,000, $30,000 to $36,000 in Bangkok. So that makes that a good option. So now what if you're thinking, okay, Southeast Asia, I don't know about Southeast Asia. What if I want to go to somewhere in Latin America? I prefer to stay in this side of the world. If you live in the Americas, well, another potential opportunity in another city that is on my list that I want to try out and spend some time is Medellín, Colombia. I also know what you're thinking here. We grew up in the 80s, right? So we're thinking Colombian drug lords. No. Medellín is now transformed from one of the most dangerous cities into one of the most globally innovative cities in the world. And then plus it is eternally spring there at, a 75-degree year-round average temperature. So again, it's just thinking outside the box. We don't have to do things the way our parents did things, or our grandparents did things from a retirement perspective. So what if you just change your zip code? You can find other cities in which you can retire early and have your money stretch longer and farther, so that you don't have to worry about running out of money before, you ultimately want to retire. Or you don't have to work until you practically drop dead either. So now you're thinking, okay, well, I don't know about, Latin America. What if I want to go to Europe? Well, guess what? You can find cities in Europe as well that can fall well within that $2,750 monthly budget. If you want. So one of those that comes to mind is Tbilisi, Georgia. And yes, it's the country Georgia, not the state Georgia. They're practically begging Americans to come there. As an American, you can stay there 365 days visa-free just with your passport. So, if it's one of those places where you're contemplating, this could be a good fit. This could be a place where I just want to try it out and see if this is a retirement home or retirement city that I might want to try on, then this is a good alternative for Europe. And lastly, for those who are thinking, okay, LaShawn, I don't want to leave the US at all, there are cities in the US where you could potentially find a place to live for $2,500 a month. And one of those I'd like to point out is El Paso, Texas. Now, the cost of living is definitely less there, but I would like to say, my biggest fear, of course, is medical expenses. My current health insurance is $1,100 a month. That is given the fact that the ACA subsidies expired when Congress let that piece of the Affordable Care Act lapse. And so now my medical benefits each month, just for my insurance premiums, is $1,100 a month. So this is something to consider as well. this geographic arbitrage doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave the country. You can absolutely stay in the United States. You just have to, again, be very strategic, and you have to plan accordingly and look for cities that are within your budget. So now if we break it all down and look at all these costs, you can basically see how each of these cities stack up against one another. And I will say, South America, Central America, Mexico, Panama, these were kind of like my first choice. However, I am going on a 2-week cruise in December that will go through Southeast Asia. Because I am going on that cruise, I kind of switched gears as far as originally I was going to start kind of on this side of the world, on this side of the globe, to try on a bunch of different cities. So I was going to start out in, say, Mérida, Mexico. I was going to look at perhaps Bogota and Medellín in Colombia. I was going to look at Panama. But since, I have a cruise in December, that's going to cross several countries in Southeast Asia over a 2-week period, it kind of made sense, rather than to spend the money crisscrossing the globe for a couple of months, to basically go and try on a bunch of cities in Southeast Asia that could potentially be new retirement homes for me and my husband. So with that, this is how I pretty much chose Bangkok as one of my cities. And I'll be spending time in a bunch of other cities as well. And so I'm still in that planning phase right now for our trip. We anticipate leaving around September of this year and heading to Southeast Asia. So very much so looking forward to it. Also, we may have a stopover in Portugal. There's a huge expat community there. And I would like to say the same is true of Bangkok. Anywhere that you decide you may want to move, you could potentially find an expat community, and I would recommend that as well. And then I'd also like to say I am in no way, shape, or form saying you should quit your job today and move to another country without A, researching, B, you probably want to take some trips to these places first and make sure that this is what you want to do. And make sure it's, a way of living that you can adjust to. If you can't, then you should not do this. Now, for me, anything I did was going to have to involve selling my house and downsizing. So this also seemed like the perfect opportunity to sell my home, downsize, and travel the world and see if I could find another city or another country that I enjoy living in that meets my budgetary needs. And then also, this is just a quick total of showing what 10 years really costs. So, based on what my current expenditures are, if I stay here in Atlanta, nothing changes, the next 10 years is going to be over $800,000. So essentially all the work I would do would just be working to stay here, and still be a little hard to be putting money away for my retirement. It would also be difficult from the perspective of, ageism is real. And as we get older and become more expensive for companies, we're the first ones that are let go during reductions, right? So there's no guarantee that if I decided to stay here in Atlanta, that I would actually be able to work until I'm 69 and still keep my same income to ensure that I could meet this lifestyle that I currently have. So there's no guarantees there either. And then, so to close, I may not need $2 million. You may not need $1 million. You may not need $1.5 million, whatever that number is, right? That is always floating around when there are surveys or when, financial advisors say this is what you need. That's all based on where you currently are today, or if you decide you're going to leave, say, California and move to Georgia, it could be based on that. But understand that everybody's situation is different. I don't have children, so I don't have to worry about that expenditure. So for me, this is the plan that works for me and for my husband. So understand that, again, I'm not saying you should quit your job tomorrow. I'm not saying you should plan on leaving the country or moving. This is merely my plan, my choice, and, kind of like just a way for you to see that there is another way. It doesn't even have to involve leaving the U.S. It could just be changing your zip code, which could still be in the U.S. So with that, thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. It's been LaShawn with Semi-Retired Kind of Life. If this information was helpful or useful to you, please like and subscribe. Please hype and share this if there's somebody that you think could use this information. So Thanks. Until the next time.